In the scene that kicks off the tale, Prince Oscar leads a subordinate named Lazar to the vicinity of a dragon soaring the skies, and the young servant pleads to go back home, fearing certain death. However, Oscar reminds him that a retreat now would thwart all efforts to escape the castle. Meanwhile, Lazar fears the witch might cast another curse on his highness, but Oscar has no choice, for he has yet to gather any clues to reverse his dreadful condition, even after 15 years of searching. Thus, he remains steadfast in the quest for the Blue Moon Witch to uncover how to break his curse. If that fails, they'll have to find the one responsible for the spell, the Witch of Silence. This is the story of a witch residing in a blue tower and a royal prince afflicted by a curse. In this narrative, everything could be rewritten, making us ponder what we'd change if we could turn back time. As they open the gate, the two notice everything matches the records, suggesting the walls of this place indeed harbor dark challenges, and whoever overcomes them all to reach the top will have their wish granted by the witch. Since it's an extremely perilous journey, the prince asks the servant to wait below, promising to return before sunset, but the youth refuses to leave his master alone in this place. On the second floor, the nobleman approaches a massive stone plaque with inscriptions, and Lazar warns about the snakes surrounding the floor. However, Oscar assures him they'll be fine because they're not venomous and tackles the first challenge, showcasing an ancient mathematical theory studied about 100 years ago in a small eastern nation, famous for never being solved. However, that's in the past as the theory was resolved 10 years ago, so Oscar presents the answer and the first plaque disintegrates. Lazar asks once again if it wouldn't be better to leave now, but the prince is starting to enjoy the challenge until a magic circle appears beneath them, absorbing them both. At the top of the tower, Latola, a servant of the Blue Moon Witch, informs her mistress that the first challengers in a long time have arrived. Last month, a traveler ran out of time after failing to solve the first stone plaque, so as few challengers have been arriving, the servant wonders if the mistress would like to observe these ones, but she prefers to wait for them to climb on their own and instructs Latola to do her job if the adventurers fail. Alone, the witch reflects that the vast majority progresses quickly until they lose their lives to the first guardian beast. Meanwhile, Prince Oscar cuts a beast in half, assuming it was animated by magic, hence not real. Lazar comments that the prince's lack of fear is making him even more afraid, but Oscar remains calm in the face of circumstances. Pressing forward, he approaches the edge and questions if he would die if he fell, and Lazar grows increasingly scared by his master's behavior. Advancing through the vast staircase, the boy believes they have reached the halfway point of the tower, and Oscar takes the opportunity to remind him that his great-grandfather was the last to reach the top 70 years ago. Lazar knows this tale when 10 men made the climb, yet only King Regius, reigning at the time, reached the summit. Catching on, Oscar believes he'll follow in his great-grandfather's footsteps to the end of this tower. Thus, they reach a door guarded by 2 opposing stone gargoyles, so the monarch draws his sword, suspecting the monsters might come to life. Oscar shows less patience with his servant's nerves and orders him to go back, when finally the creatures manifest and attack the prince. Oscar uses his serenity to stay calm and study the enemy's movements, and dodging the first attack, he retaliates with a precise strike that cleaves one of the gargoyles in half. At that moment, Latola alerts the mistress that the challengers have reached the gargoyle room. The witch asks how many there are, and Latola replies 2, but in practice, only 1. The mistress was brewing tea for them. Although she believes they won't arrive to enjoy it, yet Latola asserts with conviction that this challenge will be overcome, causing a genuine surprise in the witch. Finally, Oscar wrenches his sword from the eye of the last gargoyle and cuts down the statue, ending the skirmish. This time, he realizes he's reached a stage where taking a blow could cost his life, but that doesn't deter him from continuing his journey. However, before moving on to the next level, the floor of the chamber begins to disintegrate, separating the master from his servant, and as the ground gives way towards the young boy, Lazar asks the prince to continue without him, revealing he eagerly awaits the day Oscar will become king. Then the floor supporting Lazar finally collapses, taking the lad into the shadows of an endless abyss. With no way to prevent the fall, the future king turns and maintains the determination to reach the top, opening the door to the next stage of the tower. This time, the chamber bears no resemblance to the rooms that once held stone demons until Oscar spots a table with a teapot. At that moment, a mysterious figure invites the man to sit with her, introducing herself as Tinasha, although nobody calls her by her true name. Oscar asks if she's the witch due to her youthful appearance, but Tinasha finds it impolite to question a witch's appearance. Soon she informs him that his companion is sleeping downstairs without any injuries. He asks if she used magic to alter his appearance, but Tinasha is offended again by these personal questions. Oscar argues that the woman is hundreds of years old, and he sees no wrinkles on her, So the witch explains her body doesn't bear the marks of time at the pace of humans, and her body simply stopped aging, for example. Changing the subject, Tanisha wants to know the name of this brave warrior who was the first to ascend to the top of the tower practically alone. So the man apologizes for the rudeness and introduces himself as Oscar Leth, heir prince of the Farsa's royalty, great-grandson and descendant of King Regius. Impressed, Tanisha notes Oscar's resemblance to the ancient king, although she finds the ancestor's face more welcoming. Oscar laments not showing his emotions, but the witch laughs at the formality and replies that at least the young prince is more handsome, although Reg was a pure soul with a childlike side. Finally, Oscar shows a feeling of surprise upon seeing the witch mention his great-grandfather by nickname, while Tanisha introduces her servant Latola, who recounts that the prince's companion is sound asleep outside the tower due to the spell she cast. Concerning this, Oscar believed that the witch buried men who couldn't climb a common grave, but once again, Tanisha is offended by the insinuation that she lives surrounded by a cemetery. In reality, she aims to avoid flooding her home with bodies, thus ensuring not to kill any visitors. Rightly so, the prince argues that the claws of those gargoyles are enough to tear any man apart, so she reveals that she sends challengers to the ground floor at the exact moment of the fatal blow, and those who fail have their memories manipulated and are thrown into random corners of the continent. According to Tanisha, most adventurers seek only honors and glories, and this is a fair price to pay for their excessive attachment to these things. On the other hand, Latola explains that some challengers face the deadly dangers of the tower in search of a cure for their sick children. And to these people, her mistress demonstrates a kindness as noble as her ambitions. Curious about this mysterious behavior, Oscar would like to know if the witch usually visits the nearby cities, but Tanisha has no interest in interfering in human lives, vulgarizing the real purpose of her gift with spells. In turn, Oscar laments that the Witch of Silence does not share the same thought, since it was she who cursed the prince. That night, she went up to the king's room to make both the father and the son sterile, rendering them unable to produce heirs, because royal blood now corrodes every woman they touch, extinguishing the Farsa's lineage after Oscar's death. To this day, the prince doesn't know the reason for suffering this curse, as his father refused to comment on it, but he believes it's related to his mother, who died before this. Since then, Oscar has always sought a cure for this spell in the books and ruins that permeate the land of men, but no clue has ever been found, and in the search for answers, the prince reached the top of this tower. Tanisha makes it clear that there is no guarantee that a curse can be undone, because what witches call magic is organized and operated by a shared set of rules. However, curses follow no law. Furthermore, clear words must be imbued to break the spell, so if the curse's breaking is indefinite when it is cast, not even the caster can do anything. To make matters worse, Tanisha comments that curses are not usually so powerful, and they always indirectly hit the target, so Oscar must actually be suffering from a variant of the blessing. To prove her point, the witch touches the man's face and displays the mark of the blessing imposed on him. Interestingly, a blessing can be used for evil purposes. For example, that witch imposed such a powerful protection on all fetuses generated by the Farsas that no human woman is capable of bearing. Tanisha assures that there are magics to alleviate this blessing, but the Witch of Silence is so powerful that she sealed this spell with 20 layers of protection, hiding the cure in a veritable minefield. Therefore, Oscar must find a woman capable of resisting this protective power of the child. So Tanisha looks for this person based on the prince's magical power and resistance. He asks what to do if this woman is married, elderly, or a child, and Tanisha humorously makes it clear that the married one will have to betray, while the elderly, with a little help from magic, can be the old pot that cooks good food. As for the child, following the traditions of human kingdoms, they are usually shaped by the man until becoming an ideal woman for the next 20 years or so. However, the man is afraid of having to date a walking mummy, so he questions whether Tanisha herself would be able to resist the power of the blessing on her body. Innocently, she confirms yes, and seeing where this guy is getting at, the witch asks for calm at this moment, but soon Oscar says that his wish is to leave this tower with Tanisha as his wife. The woman refuses without thinking twice, but Oscar reminds her that she would do everything possible to grant his wish, and moreover, she herself said that she would find a way if she were elderly. Tanisha is enraged at being called old, but the issue isn't that. It's that this prince is simply trying to introduce witch blood into the royal lineage. Faced with this madness, Tanisha comments that her great-grandfather made this same insane proposal 70 years ago, but Oscar remains firm in his proposition, not backing down at all. Seeing that the man wouldn't back down, Tanisha threatens to erase the prince's memory and dump him at the corner of Neverland, so Oscar prepares to retaliate. However, the witch notices that the adventurer carries with him the royal sword Acacia, the only one in the world immune to magic. With no chance against her natural enemy, Tanisha sits back upon encountering the weapon of dialogue. Back at the table, the two stare at each other like two lions in a jungle, until Oscar comments that Tanisha lived in Farsa's castle 70 years ago, from what he heard. The witch replies that she stayed there for a year and a half teaching magic and cultivating flowers. Faced with this, Oscar asks for just 1 year with the witch in his kingdom as his final wish as the winner. Finally, the Witch of the Blue Moon accepts to leave her tower as the protector of the Farsa's prince, while Lazar wakes up outside muttering his wish to leave this place. At that moment, Oscar appears and introduces his companion as the witch's pupil, responsible for helping to remove the curse. Lazar whispers in the prince's ear why the witch of this tower didn't eat him alive, so Oscar asks back if this boy isn't afraid of death. Then the group sets off and the entrance to the tower is sealed, while Tanisha makes it clear that Oscar can ask whenever he wants for something to be completely burnt. Oscar says it won't be necessary because all that matters is her being by his side. By the way, he allows the witch to stay longer in Farsis if she wishes, but Tanisha replies that this won't be necessary either. As they settle into Oscar's house at Farsis Castle, Tanisha grants the prince a blessing that nullifies all external attacks, whether physical or magical. As long as she remains alive, no other human can break this spell. Oscar considers it almost like cheating, and the witch responds that making a pact with a witch itself is cheating. However, the man is still vulnerable to poisons and psychological attacks. Oscar jokes that this spell isn't too bad for an apprentice mage, and Tanisha mentions that's what they'll think she's within this palace, while in fact, she works to break Oscar's curse. He remarks that she could work to marry him, but the girl replies that they've already talked about that. Later, near the training courtyard, she comments to Lazar how complicated it is for Oscar not to have a successor, and she questions if there's no one else from the royal lineage, even if from a secondary family. In response, Lazar tells her that 15 years ago, there were a series of cases where babies disappeared throughout the kingdom, when all of Prince Oscar's cousins vanished. As a result, there was no royal member younger than him left. Meanwhile, while lighting a candle chandelier, the mage Cav asks Sylvia if she had the same luck, but the girl is struggling to do the same until she breaks the chandelier holder and Tanisha has to help. Sylvia is impressed by the spell without recitation from that woman, while Cav comments that the prince brought that person from the witch's tower. After helping Lazar with loading the books, Tanisha stops to observe sword training in the courtyard and asks who the two dueling are. Lazar tells her they are General Owls and Officer Meridina, and that this young general is recognized as the most skilled of all, even though Prince Oscar is stronger than him. Tanisha didn't expect anything else from a man who conquered her tower, and to the servant's surprise, she soon descends to personally practice sword against the general. During the fight, Alls lets out some nervous laughs for not believing that a simple amateur could be so efficient. Then he comments that if she stopped being a mage, she would be very useful on the front line. After the duel, Alls comments to Officer Meridina that it's clear the prince didn't bring this woman just because he likes her. Meridina heard that she is the witch's apprentice and considers that to be a problem, so the general jokes that jealousy doesn't suit the girl, who gets back at the boy for the tasteless joke. Speaking of witch's apprentice, coincidentally, Latola appears in the courtyard of Farsa's castle in search of the mistress, and she is happy that Tanisha has found a good person for the pact and is having so much fun, but there is something she would like the witch to know. Shortly after, Tanisha enters the prince's office in battle attire and warns that she will be absent for 2 or 3 days. Oscar comments that he made a pact and can't be separated from the girl, so he asks her to at least inform where she's going. When she explains that she's traveling to the magical lake in Druza, Lazar enters despair because it was there where the demonic beast was sealed by the witch 70 years ago. Tanisha remembers that well and also knows that in that area, large surges and waves of high magical power haunt the place. Her intention is to discover who is responsible for this and what he is plotting. In this case, Oscar wants to go along with qualified soldiers, even though Tanisha promised to ensure the prince's safety only. That said, the witch gives him an hour to organize his departure. Meanwhile, at the magical lake, Vault observes the heavy fog awaiting something that is not visible, but is about to begin. He hopes that the Witch of the Blue Tower will notice soon. The girl beside him questions if this witch will really come to such a distant place, but Vault has no doubts because she has eyes all over the continent and is in search of the same thing he is. An hour later, the preparations were completed and Sylvia is enchanted by the dragon on Tanisha's shoulder, so she introduces herself to the witch and tries to touch the beast, but it seems she's not in the mood. Oscar asks why she's taking a dragon, and she replies that she intends to ride it if she goes alone. The prince comments that this monster doesn't seem big enough for that, and then informs the expedition group that the goal is to investigate the magical lake in Druza, and that no one should contradict Tanisha's orders. The soldiers are confused by this statement, and Tanisha asks if it's right to say that, but Oscar maintains his posture. Before the departure, the witch hears her name being said from a deep echo, Then the world around her loses color along with her companions who disappear. Alone, she analyzes the life she chose for herself, where everyone around her are grains of sand that fade with time, but she remains immune to the passage of years, always in the same place. After that, things return to normal and Oscar seems to notice something strange about his fiancée, but prefers to let it go. Soon they all teleport to Unirite Fortress, northwest of Pharsis on the border with Druza. General Owls points to the cloud of magical power on the horizon. Then the group sets off on their mission to the magical lake. 70 years ago, the neighboring nation Druza invaded Pharsis, and even though Pharsis had a well-prepared and equipped army, Druza had up its sleeve a magical weapon that could decide the course of the war, a gigantic demonic beast. When released, the beast devastated everything around it, whether enemies, allies, or the land itself. In the end, the beast was sealed by the Witch of the Blue Moon. However, the miasma that the monster exhaled poisoned the land, killing everything around it, until it turned the territory into an arid desert. Walking in those surroundings, Oscar feels as if he's in a nightmare, heading towards a demon amidst a dark cloud. According to Tinashe, this demon was a formidable opponent. She remembers that her option was to seal him, since there were many humans around. If she continued to fight, the result would be catastrophic. Suddenly, Tinashe stops in her tracks and commands someone to show up because she knows he's present. With that, the soldiers go on high alert, and everyone hears an evil laughter in the midst of the fog, approaching until it reveals itself as the magician of Druza. The magician is delighted to see Tinashe still alive, and with all her stunning beauty, he feels as if he's been transported back 70 years ago when he met Miss Blue Moon Witch. Upon hearing the witch's name, Sylvia becomes terrified, while Tinashe mocks the old and worn appearance of the Druza sorcerer because back then, he was just a kid. The magician acknowledges that he's not in his prime of beauty, but unfortunately, not everyone can maintain a pretty face like the witch. Tinashe comments that the man looks just like her former mentor, whom she cut off, and since the magician seems proud of it, she promises to cut him off too to become even more similar to her master. Facing the threat, the old man retreats, knowing he stands no chance against the witch, but he makes it clear to everyone present that they should leave as soon as possible. However, if they refuse, he can convince them by bringing a death or two. Along with this, the wizard invokes a magic that shoots projectiles at the expedition group as if it were rain. Oscar repels some magical arrows using his sword, but part of the team is killed instantly. Meridina was about to be hit, but the prince absorbs the magical projectile using his immunity granted by the witch. Meanwhile, Tinashe keeps her word and beheads the Druza magician, but he releases his own head as if it didn't belong to him and leaves laughing. After the escape, Tinashe explains that the old man is one of the magicians who controlled the beast, and that this surge of magical power is probably the result of trying to revive this creature, an attempt at revenge 70 years after its defeat. At this point, Tinashe heals one of the allies and Sylvia questions if she really is a witch, but instead of answering, she gives a gentle smile and asks Oscar if he intentionally let the enemy magic hit his hand. Oscar recalls that the attacks don't affect him, leaving Meridina frightened, but the witch still seems concerned. Although she didn't answer, Tinashe sees that the expedition group couldn't do anything but look at her with a strange look, so she sees no way out but to apologize for keeping this secret. Sylvia seems frightened and tries to downplay the situation for Tinashe, but she takes the young woman's hand and explains that witches are indeed something to be feared, so Sylvia shouldn't feel bad. Next, Oscar announces a temporary retreat to rethink his strategy in light of the facts that Tinashe wants to go after the magician alone because the enemy will do everything to revive the beast after discovering the presence of Pharsis soldiers. However, once again, Oscar insists on accompanying the woman because he doesn't want her to do all the dirty work for him alone. After all, the target of these Druza remnants is still the kingdom of Pharsis. On the other hand, the witch acknowledges that the man is persistent but reminds him that the pact they seal is only for a year, and in this brief period, she will fulfill her promise, and as long as she is Oscar's protector, she will always come back to him, no matter what she does or where she goes. Thus, Oscar releases the woman's hand and allows her to leave, and she reveals the true form of her dragon Nark by using the immense beast as a mount. Oscar asks if Tinashe would like to marry him when they return, but she gets nervous and leaves, saying that talking about these things brings bad luck before the fight. Meanwhile, the magician of Druza hurries the other sorcerers to break the seal quickly, but the control spell is not yet ready. The old man warns that the intruders are about to arrive, so the magicians strive to finish the work as soon as possible. The old man becomes excited about the imminent return of the demon because then he will finally be able to restore Druza's power. But Tinashe had already arrived and executes each of the sorcerers mercilessly, except for one. She questions if his intention was to undo the seal, and she immediately takes on the responsibility of doing it for him. Thus, she invokes her own spell and frees the beast, But despite that threatening presence, Tinashe orders Nark to stay back while she deals with the problem. Soon, Tinashe provokes the demon by asking if the sleep was good during those 70 years, and the giant wolf becomes enraged upon recognizing who imprisoned him all that time, then attacks with devastating magic. Tinashe retaliates with her own spell, but the beast's thick skin absorbs the impact without problems. Then the witch and the beast engage in an epic battle, and Tinashe uses her agility to swiftly navigate the beast's most vulnerable points and emit magical focuses that are subsequently used as explosives. Although she inflicted wounds on the wolf with the explosion, it regenerates instantly, but Tinashe uses these magical focuses to recite a spell that refers to the 7 shackles on the beast's body, which must sleep in the cave of ignorance it rejected. This time, Tinashe needs to kill the demon, so she continues reciting the spell to eliminate it, but the wolf bites into the witch's torso as she tries to finish her spell. Awaiting the outcome of the battle at Fort Unarid, Oscar sees Nark arriving from the battle across the horizon until the dragon delivers the witch with her belly cut open. Later, Oscar and Nark wait for the results of the examination, and soon Sylvia informs them that she found no serious injuries because apparently Tinashe herself closed the open belly. Thus, the prince rushes to see how the woman is, but she tells him to leave the room until she finishes dressing. After that, she explains that she suffered severe damage to her organs, but she recovered by accelerating her body's growth. Because of this growth, she will return to her previous appearance. Finally, Oscar thanks the woman for saving everyone on the expedition, and she responds that it was nothing. After all, she was a witch. The next day, Tinashe was caressing her familiar, which soon flew off the balcony. Shortly after, Sylvia enters the witch's room to serve coffee and sees her with a knife ready to cut her hair. The mage panics and asks to cut the woman's hair instead of her doing such a crazy thing. During the act, Tinashe questions if Sylvia isn't afraid of a witch like her. And the mage even acknowledges that witches are scary because, according to records, there are 5 of them in the world, and one night they together destroyed a nation in one night. However, Sylvia believes that Tinashe wouldn't do that, and this belief made the human change her perception of these sorceresses. On the other hand, when asked, Tinashe confesses that she got fears she didn't know how to deal with in the past, but that diminished after so many years of life. Currently, she hates being forced to go to bed, and she also bothers with the fact that she never knows what Oscar is thinking, and that sometimes it seems like he thinks of Tinashe as a cat he took off the streets. After having her hair cut, the Blue Moon Witch is introduced to the King of Pharsis, Kevin, as the prince's future wife, even though she insists on denying this information, correcting that she's there to remove Oscar's curse. Since she needs time to analyze a way to do this, she's staying at the castle. Oscar comments that she will have to take full responsibility if she fails, and this makes Tinashe start to rant again in front of the king, who comments to Lazar how well this couple gets along. Meanwhile, the mysterious Vault and Marries continue around the magical lake of Druza, and Vault believes it was lucky that the Blue Moon Witch suffered a serious injury when defeating the demon because that gave them a chance to possess this red stone. Out of nowhere, another man appears, saying he thought he was dealing with a local dog, but it seems that girl already took care of that. Vault replies that she has been looking for the green-eyed mage for a long time, but he understands that he must seek the witch at the right time. After all, she wanted to see him all this time. Vault emphasizes that in all stories, this man treats the witch very badly, but when the green-eyed mage questions where he got that from, Vault doesn't go into details and says he's just a mere spectator. However, the mage mentions that the guy seems to have his own plans, so Vault explains that the only purpose of his clan is to help bring about events that are about to happen, nothing more than that. Nevertheless, the mage does not allow the departure of the duo because the witch is special to him and no interference will be allowed. That said, Vault casts a spell to protect Marries, but he is hit by a spell that disintegrates his body. Meanwhile, in the Bile Forest, northeast of Pharsis, Oscar takes Lazar to the place where the incident occurred. As always, Lazar appears apprehensive because 9 villagers ended up dead there and their bodies were found dry and wrinkled. However, that's why the cause needs to be discovered as soon as possible, in the prince's opinion. Taking advantage of Tinashe's absence, Oscar will have more freedom to act as he pleases, but he has to avoid being attacked so the witch isn't alerted to the damage to his protege's defensive barrier. Walking a little further, Lazar shows his master a pearl grown from a plant, and the nobleman can't believe how naive the boy is. Soon the plants with pearls grow and one tries to strangle Lazar, but Oscar saves the young man. Neither of them knows this plant, but they suppose that they are the ones causing all this harm by sucking the water from the prey's bodies. That said, Oscar aims at the largest of the plants and pierces it with his sword. The supposed pearl explodes and releases a strange poisonous purple liquid, and shortly after, another different plant releases a toxin that makes Lazar faint. Before he could reach the boy, Oscar is approached by a woman who wants to know what they are doing in this forest. Hours later, Lazar wakes up in a nice house in the middle of the afternoon, and his master calms the servant, informing him that the woman gave him an antidote. Lazar doesn't understand who he's talking about until the girl herself appears, introducing herself as Lucrezia, although she is better known as the Witch of the Forbidden Forest. After giving the boy another dose of the antidote, she laughs when she sees him coughing as he ingests the substance, and then she asks Oscar if Tinashe is still the same. After all, only Tinashe would be able to cast a defensive barrier like the one she detected on the prince, so Oscar tells her that she's acting as his protector, and Lazar adds that his master was able to defeat the witch's tower alone. Impressed, Lucrezia asks if the warrior wished to be the king of the whole world as a prize, but Lazar interrupts and says that in fact the prince asked to marry the Blue Moon Witch. In the midst of her laughter, Lucrezia adds that Tinashe is a spiritual sorceress, and that wizards of this type are the only ones who should remain pure, since mixing souls during that act drastically increases the power needed to perform spiritual magic. Despite this, the power of the Blue Moon Witch is so great that it wouldn't make a difference, so it would be good for her to try to get married someday. Thus, she decides to help the prince in this quest for love, though the spell that was not revealed. As tensions were starting to grow in the room, Lazar suggests they leave for now, and Oscar embraces the idea. The next day, back at the castle, Tinashe asks if they encountered any problems in her absence. The two pretend that nothing happened, and Lazar swiftly changes the subject, while Oscar announces that he's going out. As he passes the witch, she seems to notice something strange, although Oscar disagrees. After that day, the prince woke up as usual in the early morning, and Tinashe was at the door of the man's room asking if he slept well. Oscar says yes, but his vision is blurred with fatigue, and he projected the vision of the second Tinashe, leaving the original one calling his name. Even in the face of visible discomfort, Oscar insists that there's nothing wrong with his sleep, so Tinashe decides to give up questioning the noble. Unable to extract anything from the man, she turns to his servant, then approaches Lazar to inquire about the master's sleep. However, the boy doesn't know much whether the prince sleeps in boxers or spooning with two pillows, so he doesn't have much to add. Nevertheless, Tinashe insists on the subject, questioning if Oscar hasn't had any recent affairs, and Lazar swears up and down that he hasn't and soon comments that this seems like jealousy. In response, the witch tells the kid to keep that kind of opinion to himself. Later, Tinashe tells her students that Oscar is having an affair because his life force has been fluctuating differently, besides the perfume that can be smelled from afar, and therefore he should make it public that he has a lover. Doan, one of the magicians from Farsis, remarks that it's not common for someone to go around shouting that they have a lover. Furthermore, he passed by Oscar just now and didn't smell anything. With that said, Tinashe clenches her fist and causes a tremor in the entire room, and soon bids farewell to the pupils, making Doan pity whoever betrays this witch. In no time, Tinashe was already on top of the prince, outraged that he didn't tell her he met Lucrezia. Oscar excuses himself, saying he thought it wasn't important. However, the girl points out that if meeting a witch isn't important, then she's a four-wheeled motorcycle, and reminds him that he's still vulnerable to psychological attacks. Therefore, if something goes wrong in that sense, maybe she can't do anything. Fortunately, she found out in time and explains that this is a spell disguised as a lover in the person's dreams, but gradually steals the victim's life force through the intimate relationship, and that there are cases where the victim dies within a week from it. Tinashe discovered this through the strong smell of flowers on the protege's body, like a woman's perfume, and apparently Lucrezia cast this spell in a way that only Tinashe could perceive. Thus, the Blue Moon Witch is willing to remove this spell, but there are risks involved in it. As night falls, Tinashe accompanies Oscar's sleep, who dreams of his entrance into a house with a vast corridor, where at the end there was a staircase leading to an empty expanse, where there was only a bed and Tinashe sitting on it. The two embrace affectionately, but he starts to strangle her against his will as he tries to stop his impulse. However, Tinashe's voice inside his mind orders him to continue, so Oscar breaks the woman's neck and ends her life. Having done that, the prince wakes up sweating in his own bed, while the real Blue Moon Witch congratulates the protege for the deed, warning that all the life energy stolen by Lucrezia has been returned to him. Still, Oscar rants for having had to eliminate Tinashe, even if not for real. Then the witch replies that as long as he wields the royal sword Acacia, someday he will have to kill her in real life. Without further explanation, she wishes the prince a good night's sleep and leaves. Without wasting time, Tinashe knocks on Lucrezia's door to demand limits for these sick fetishes. In her defense, the forest witch argues that sick is the way Tinashe broke the curse, with a hanging. The Blue Moon Witch says that was the most effective and fastest way, and questions why the other witch did that. To Lucrezia, that was like a little greeting after so long, and as she hands a drink to the old acquaintance, she asks if she could have that handsome man in case the colleague doesn't want him. Tanisha tells her to take him if she wants, but quickly retracts, remembering it would be bad to introduce another witch's blood in this case. With that, Lucrezia realizes that this is the Silent Witch's doing and already foresees the work it will take to break this curse. Therefore, as an apology, she passes on to Tanisha Oscar's blood and cream, because according to her, these would be the most affected by the curse. In turn, Tanisha understands that with just one prick you can draw someone's blood. She just doesn't know how many pricks it takes to extract the other substance. Speaking of which, Lucrezia emphasizes that the spell she cast on Oscar didn't stipulate that it should be Tanisha in the dreams, but rather reflected the man's own desires. Faced with this, the Forbidden Forest witch believes that the prince really likes the colleague. Sometime later, Tanisha meets Oscar in his room, and without ceremony, he calls her close and puts the girl in his lap next to him on the bed. Then he apologizes, and the witch takes the opportunity to do the same. The next day, Oscar joined the soldiers in the training yard to take part in the activities. After defeating yet another soldier from the regiment, it was General All's turn to step forward against the prince, but he too was overcome without much difficulty by the talented Prince of Pharsis. Seeking a greater challenge, the heir to the throne saw Tanisha passing by and invited her to a duel. As she immediately declined, Oscar allowed the use of magic, prompting her to reconsider while questioning whether this man would one day be capable of killing a witch like her. Above all, as she presented herself for the challenge, she demanded that Oscar use the royal acacia sword in this fight, and so the confrontation finally began. Right from the start, Tanisha cast a spell against her opponent, emanating several energy projectiles, making it very difficult for him to avoid being hit. Seizing this distraction, she attacked the adversary with her swords. After the fight, she healed the Prince of Pharsis, while Meridina learned on that day what it means to use magic in close combat. Alice pointed out that most mages stay in the rear casting spells, but he had never seen one who also took the front line of battle. The officer concluded that the witch was too relaxed in that duel, seeming to teach her opponent, and indeed Tanisha was delighted when she realized that Oscar could see an invisible magical vine, just before announcing the end of the fight. As she began to receive healing, the prince asked Tanisha if she had taken it easy in the duel, but she considered that the focus required for enchantments demanded a lot of effort, and she deliberately avoided close combat for fear of being defeated. Oscar replied that he did the same because he didn't want to kill the witch, to which she views the human as knave for thinking so. Finally, when he asked if she wished to die, Tanisha replied that she still had to break Oscar's curse before that, and he made it clear that he would prefer to go through all of this married to the witch, who once again refused the request and left. Shortly after, Oscar received a letter from the small nation of Cuscal to the north, wishing to meet the Blue Moon Witch. The prince wanted to know how they found out about the witch's stay at Pharsis Castle, but the king couldn't say. Nevertheless, he tasked the prince with resolving this matter. Soon the envoy from Cuscal appeared in the kingdom, introducing himself as Kagar and requesting an audience with the Blue Moon Witch. Oscar denied the existence of such a creature in Pharsis territory, but the envoy remained steadfast in his conviction, even provoking by saying he would love to see the 80 Witch, which surprised Oscar to hear a different name for Tanisha. Meanwhile, Tanisha is looking for Oscar, so a maid informs her that he is busy at the moment, taking the opportunity to introduce herself as Miralis, saying that she started serving His Highness after being recommended by General Eddard. On the other hand, Tanisha senses the energetic aura around the maid and knows the reason she got this position, but asks the girl not to mind her. Later, Lucrezia appears in Pharsis and invites Tanisha for tea, during which she questions if Tanisha is trying to die while showing Oscar how to fight, because the user of the royal acacia sword could become a real problem if he gets even stronger. Nevertheless, the Blue Moon Witch herself doesn't know why she felt the urge to duel the prince. Maybe she just wanted someone to kill her. As she grew tired of waiting for that other person who would be capable of it, suddenly Lazar appears with his master to summon the witch for the audience, and when Oscar insists on calling her Eddie, her surprised expression confirms to him that indeed that was her real name. As soon as she meets with the envoy from Cuscal, Tanisha demands not to be called Eddie and instructs him to get straight to the point. Kagar reveals that the Cuscal Foundation has restored the rights of persecuted mages in Tayuri, so he wants Tanisha to lend her expertise to develop their abilities. However, without showing resentment, Tanisha clarifies that her mission there is to protect the heir of Pharsis, nothing more and nothing less, and orders the man who has never had the honor of ascending her tower to disappear before making such a request of such magnitude. After being expelled, Kagar was sure the witch would accept the request when he called her Eddie, but now he's thinking of a way to separate her from the prince, until he sees Meridina resting in the yard. After the audience, Tanisha meets Lucrezia in one of the castle corridors and asks if she happens to know the nation of Cuscal, a group of mages who proclaimed independence last year. Lucrezia is unaware of this new country, but had indeed noticed strange waves of magic emanating from the north, subtle and sporadic fluctuations as if coming from a lake. In the meantime, Marries approaches and suddenly attacks the Blue Moon Witch, but when Tinashe was about to retaliate with a stab in the officer's gut, Alls manages to prevent the death of his companion by intervening in time. Faced with the situation, Oscar puts his sword to the general's neck, who cannot explain himself, while Marries accuses the witch of deceiving men's hearts and therefore should leave this country. This is an accusation that Tinashe has heard many times, although she has never actually done so, and so she becomes saddened and cries, but Lucrezia is certain that the woman is acting this way because she is under mental control. Oscar asks her to reverse the spell, so the Forbidden Forest witch warns that it won't come cheap, while Tinashe tries to remember the last time she cried. Already lying in her bed, Tinashe hears Lucrezia say that she has already treated the bewitched officer, but the girl doesn't seem to care about that at the moment. The next day, Tinashe invites Oscar to her tower and informs him that she sent a familiar to investigate Cusco. So from now on, she wants the prince to train with her. Without further ado, the first training session between the two takes place right there. At that moment, and after the fight, Tinashe praises the man's performance, who wants to know the reason for all of this. Tinashe explains that she would like Oscar to choose the path he desires among the greatest number of options possible, and so she hopes he will come back for another training session tomorrow. Said and done, the prince returns for another series of duels, and Tinashe was getting heavier with the human, who returned day after day as soon as he finished his official duties. At the end of each training session, the witch healed the man, and they would have tea together. Over time, Oscar was already facing two opponents at once. However, when Tinashe used her invisible vine again, this time the prince couldn't see it and was knocked down. Facing this, Tinashe realizes that mental exhaustion affected the man's perception. He couldn't see what he had seen before in the fight against her in the palace. With that said, Oscar proves the witch's point by fainting on her shoulder, forcing the girl to leave him somewhere. When he wakes up not understanding anything, Oscar leaves where he was left and finds the Blue Moon Witch on the highest balcony of the tower. He touches the witch's waist from behind and asks why she didn't slap him. Then Tinashe explains that she expected that from the boy, but if it bothers him, he just needs to control himself. Then she gives him tea with 3 kilos of sugar to recover his pupil's fatigue, who questions if he can have magical power while getting diabetes by drinking the beverage. The tutor tells the prince that he has magical power, however, he won't be able to use it while wielding the acacia, but he can still see invisible spells like the vine. Thinking about it, the next day, the Tower Witch surrounds Oscar in a circle of fire and tells him to observe the flow of magic and then cut it when he finds the place that acts as the axis of the spell composition. Not understanding much of what was said, Oscar swings his sword around the circle without causing any effect until he stops to analyze the flames around him more deeply. Soon, he sees the axis mentioned by the witch and cuts it with the acacia. Tinashe applauds the human's success and considers putting him to fight against others of his kind next. To the tower owner's luck, a group of 5 adventurers invades the place to conquer the labyrinth, giving Tinashe exactly what she was looking for. Soon, she announces that any wish will be granted to the team if they defeat the man in front of them. And as the team prepares to advance, the witch warns Oscar that she will prevent any deaths, so he can go all out in this fight. With that said, the heir to the throne of Farces wins the conflict without breaking a sweat, so Tinashe decides to end the training for today. Oscar asks if he would be able to win a duel against the witch now, and she replies that it wouldn't be fun if they already knew the answer. At that moment, a familiar cat of the woman returns to the tower with information about Cusco. At dawn, Tinashe returns to Farces and tells the servants Lazar and Marries that the small nation to the north has about 200 spiritual mages and wizards. Impressed, Lazar mentions the fact that each country only has an average of 20 to 30 mages, and that's why Oscar considers the possibility of Cusco preparing for a war. Tinashe doesn't deny this risk, as they were seen trying to summon demons. According to Oscar, since that territory is a monarchy, and considering that the current monarch is not the former lord of the lands, the chances of a mage leading the nation are high, so the prince intends to continue investigating. At that moment, Alls interrupts the meeting hastily to warn about General Eddard. After some time, the officers and servants close to Eddard attended his funeral, especially Marries, who was summoned to the palace precisely because of that man. Sobbing, the young woman remembers how kind he was even though he was a distant relative. As for the prince, he remembers that he is indebted to the deceased, as is Alls because Eddard was responsible for training the young general to the point where he could reach the level he achieved, just as he taught Oscar to be a strong man after he was cursed. Keeping that in mind, Oscar asks Tinashe not to die before him. After the burial, Lazar tells the prince that General Eddard's belongings will be left to the closest relatives and that Owls was informed about His Highness's curse. As marriage would solve the situation, Owls questions what bothers the heir so much that the witch doesn't want to live beside him. Since she didn't expect such a question, the witch becomes confused and doesn't know what to answer, so Lazar suggests it might be his mocking habit. Anyway, whatever it is, Tinashe points out that she still has 6 months in the palace, and that's enough time to solve this problem. Besides this one, a problem that the witch solved instantly was magically picking up the sugar cubes she dropped, although the teapot lid wasn't as lucky. Oscar asks if she can fix the lid, so she explains that she can't undo what's broken, and even though she can stop time, she can't make it go back, because apart from a simple teapot, all living things share death as their final destination. In the dead of night, in some dark corner, Kagra begs for his life, while Miralis emphasizes the man's courage in coming there, because his lord killed someone important before her eyes, and even if that lord fixes everything, the sin won't be erased. So as he screams for the name of Lord Lanak, a diabolic beast advances against Kagar and kills Kuskal's emissary mercilessly. At some point in the past, a man carried Tinashe in his arms while she slept, calling her by the name Eddie as she awakened. According to him, something good is about to happen, and he wanted her to see it too. Eddie feels happy, but still sleepy, she drifts off again until the crucial moment. This time, she wakes up next to Oscar, saying she got a nightmare. To him, this happened because she fell asleep sitting up, so she should watch out for that. Tinashe agrees while lamenting having the same dream again. This morning, the prince was settling kingdom matters when Miralis serves him a mug of tea, which he thanks her for, while also noticing something strange about the girl. Nonetheless, Lazar arrives to announce that the king wants to see Oscar. Upon arrival, the sovereign says he sought advice from Tinashe about his son's future bride. Due to Oscar's curse, his wife must possess a high magical resistance, and the witch recommends Oscar marry Miralis because she meets this demand. Dissatisfied, the prince questions if the witch knew this for some time, and she responds affirmatively, stating that given the circumstances, indeed the servant is a good potential bride because her family transmits magic through lineage, and even though her power is sealed, the girl inherited magic from her parents. Oscar is irritated for not being informed earlier, but the king demands silence, stating everyone is striving to do their best for him, so he should focus on getting to know his future bride better. Later, Oscar asks the young woman who was responsible for sealing her magic. Miralis reveals it was her mother, alongside Master Kumu, meaning a double seal. Changing the subject, the prince asks Lazar where Tinashe is, as it's been a week since he last saw her, but no one knows where the witch went. In fact, she returned to the top of her tower, where at this moment she was having tea with the witch from the Forbidden Forest, Lucrezia. Tinashe tells her friend that Oscar found a candidate to marry, so now she's free from that. Although Lucrezia doubts that the Blue Moon Witch is as relieved as she claims. Suddenly, Latola alerts that a challenger has arrived at the tower, bypassing the closed entrance with teleportation. At the same time, Oscar enters the room impatiently, while Latola informs him that he broke the speed record and had the fewest companions in the challenge. Paying no heed to that, the prince gets straight to the point and questions the witch about why she's hiding. Tinashe replies she's busy trying to break the curse because it's a beautifully complex and delicate composition, requiring time and focus. Seeing the blessing of the silent witch before him, Tinashe concluded that love and hate are two sides of the same coin, and that's scary. Seeing she's indeed busy, Oscar just asks her to appear occasionally to make dinner for him when she can, and the witch agrees. The next day, she was having tea in the garden of Farsa's castle with Nark, until Alls appears to inform that nothing found in General Eddard's belongings is related to Miralis, not even the girl's past, which he researched, so he doesn't think it wise to nominate her as a princess. Tinashe replies she searched for candidates across the continent, but the only viable ones were the witches, and none possessed as much power as Miralis, so the general believes she's hiding something. Faced with this, Tinashe doesn't know how to act because she hasn't found out if she's after the royal family of Farsis or if her intention is to distance the Blue Moon Witch from the kingdom. Speaking of which, the servant passes through the courtyard at this moment, so the two take the opportunity to uncover the truth about her. Thus, they pretend to be having an affair behind a tree, and as soon as Miralis sees the situation and leaves, the guard knows she won't tell the prince anything if she's after him. But if she's after Tinashe, she will. The problem is that it wasn't just the servant who saw this happening. Upon ascending the castle, Miralis sees Oscar storming through the corridor in anger. In a short time, the prince calls Tinashe and asks what she did today. The witch replies she did the usual analyses and tries to touch the prince's face to know why he's upset, but Oscar stops her and puts on her a sealing item with properties similar to Acacia's. After that, he justifies he waited patiently, but even his patience has limits because he didn't bring the witch there to hand her over to another man. That said, Oscar picks Tanisha up, reminding her of the dream that repeats so often in her mind, and this terrifies the witch. So she slaps the man's hand and shatters all the glass in his room, and the Herod of Farces manages to calm the woman before anything worse happens. He admits his intention was just to give her a little scare, and it was in poor taste. Furthermore, he admits he beat up Alls for thinking he was having an affair with Tanisha, engaging in 10 consecutive training duels with him. Tanisha explains everything and asks the prince to apologize to the general, but anyway, Oscar doesn't want anyone withholding information about Marries. Tanisha argues they had no evidence to report, besides she didn't want to ruin any chance of Oscar falling in love with her. That said, Oscar gives the witch a double knock on the head to teach her to share information even without concrete evidence. Later, the heir to the throne of Farces gathers all the nobility to announce that he's not keeping Tanisha in the realm because he has no other choice, but because he likes her. Therefore, it's futile and undesirable to try to make him fall in love with another woman because he won't choose anyone but her. Tanisha doesn't know where to hide her face while Marries gets angry at this declaration. Oscar adds that among 1,000 options, Tanisha will always be his choice, so it doesn't make sense for her to complicate things. Finally, Oscar dismisses Marries from her position as a servant to analyze her history, and then he leaves without paying attention to the girl. At that moment, Tanisha notices a weakness in the magical shield of the castle, so she pushes Oscar while Marries combines their forces. The Blue Moon Witch tries to attack, but the bracelet imposed by Oscar hinders her magic. Therefore, Marries manages to easily hit Tanisha's eye and shows that Oscar's beloved is in great danger. It seems that the servant broke Kubu's seal alone if she was telling the truth, but at least the prince removes the bracelet from Tanisha's wrist. She orders Oscar to hide now because her blood's sneeze weakened her personal magical shield, so he must help the others take cover. Anyway, Tanisha will have to fight with only her right eye and, moreover, against the monster that invades the throne room at that time. Tanisha notices that her opponent has regenerated the demonic beast using its core, while Oscar disobeys his loyal friend's orders and takes the lead in the fight wielding the royal acacia sword. Tanisha does not oppose the man's stubbornness, as long as he ensures an easy and injury-free victory. With that said, the demonic beast advances towards the human, while Tanisha and Marries exchange spells to determine who will have the advantage in this encounter. Marries tries to incinerate the opponent's body, but she defends herself with a magical shield and counterattacks, until the wolf prevents her from casting magic. Tanisha realizes that she cannot attack or defend against this animal without enchantments, so she's useless there. Hearing this, Oscar questions what the hell she was doing fighting alone, but Tanisha explains that she could kill the rival witch at any moment, but it would be better to keep her alive to know what she wants. Knowing that she has no chance to confront the Blue Moon Witch, Marries summons spheres to ensure her safety from a distance. Tanisha throws a magic projectile at the sphere, but the orb distorts the trajectory of the magic. Without thinking twice, Tanisha throws a knife at the enemy's arm, who responds by exploding one of the spheres near her. Given the circumstances, the witch warns Oscar that he has two options. In one, the castle is entirely destroyed, and in the other, the prince will be greatly demanded. Obviously, the man chooses the second alternative, so Tanisha retreats and orders him to stay on the front line. The witch withdraws to begin a powerful enchantment, while Oscar deals with the opponents until then. Marries threatens to slit the hare's throat, but he reminds her that he spent most of his life without the magical shield protecting him at this moment. With that said, the enemy witch enhances the beast and sends it to occupy Oscar while she attacks Tanisha. Brilliantly, Oscar uses the wolf as a barrier to absorb the impact of the opponent's magic, injuring an important enemy while defending his ally. Nervous, Marries turns her attention to the human and distorts the space next to him to win the fight, but Akashi proves superior against the rival's magical attacks. The demonic beast attacks once again, but Oscar manages to shove one of Marries' spheres into the animal's mouth and devastates it from the inside out. By doing this, Oscar reflects that he needs to get used to facing demons of this caliber if he really wants to stand by Tanisha in this life. Marries desperately tries to cast another spell to return to the fight, but by this time, Tanisha had already completed her enchantment. Joining her two hands full of dark energy, the Tower Witch imposes overwhelming darkness around the entire throne room. Oscar asks her to remember to get him out of there, and the woman replies that he will not know defeat as long as she is by his side. In the next instant, the darkness dissipates completely, so Tanisha explains that she let the enemy escape on purpose. Meanwhile, Marries stuns the guards along the way until she finally discovers where what she was looking for is. In the treasure room, she tries to open a white box unsuccessfully, and there was Tanisha to ensure that the opponent does not get what she wants. With no escape, the intruding witch screams that Tinashe doesn't understand why she needs that box. She emphasizes that in the future, the Blue Moon Witch will meet the illusion she sought, suffering alone as queen. Trying to escape, the girl is grabbed by Tinashe, and when the white box falls to the ground, a bright red orb comes out of it, making Marries cry and ask forgiveness from someone named Thwart. Soon the orb sucks the witch's soul into itself, with the approval of the witch herself, leaving only her hollow, empty body behind. Observing the scene, Tinashe supposes that Lanak is involved in this. Curious, Oscar collects the strangely beautiful magical sphere from the ground. Sometime later, Tinashe's eye had fully recovered, and Oscar explains that the orb Marries was trying to steal did not originally belong to Farsis because it was something that the prince's mother brought, and he doesn't know what it is exactly. With that said, the warrior seems to have a strong headache, but he minimizes the fact and changes the subject, saying that Tinashe did not respond to his entire declaration he made to her earlier. The witch declares that she will never marry and that the man should give up. The nobleman responds that he can wait and pulls her onto his lap, while the woman reflects alone that Oscar may see only one option, but she intends to make him see several until he forgets that, so that the darkness she seeks in her past does not reach Oscar and affect the path he decides to tread. Then Tinashe warns that she's sleepy and Oscar agrees, inviting her to sleep with him, and the witch threatens to teleport the guy straight to his room. Inside, she wishes for the day when they both let go of their hands to come soon. The next day, in some distant place, Lanak, the king of Kuzco, watched his city ablaze and reminisced about the Age of Darkness, the time when he was born. In his view, a new era is about to dawn on the continent with the fall of the four great nations. Meanwhile, Tinashe works on her antidote for the Prince of Farsis until her familiar informs her that someone has returned, and the witch wonders why this return is happening after 400 years. As night falls, she reflects on people's ability to kill others for emotions or power. If that's the consequence of these feelings, the witch prefers to isolate herself from love and hatred. Even as she shields herself in a bubble, the mistress of the tower is engulfed in a madness she can't escape. Facing Oscar, she casts a spell on the unconscious man. When morning comes, the prince wakes up with a strange mark on his body, so he wakes Tinashe seeking explanations. She explains that she placed another curse in the same spot as the other, as a form of compensation. In other words, the Blue Moon Witch broke the heir's curse to the throne. She used her own blood as a catalyst and now advises Oscar can wash it off. Oscar grabs the woman's wrists and thanks her, and she smiles and magically disappears. Later, she gets irritated having to attend King Kevin's party because it's surely another one of those unbearable diplomatic balls. The prince argues that there's no one more suited than her for this occasion and wishes her luck dealing with the snakes there. Then Lazar arrives after receiving a message from Thayeri, informing that Prince Roos won't be able to attend due to the attack from Kuzco. In his place, his younger sister, Princess Cecilia, will come today. According to reports, the mages of Kuzco set fire to a city near Farsis border. Given the facts, Oscar questions whether this would be an act of revenge, considering that mages have always been persecuted by Thayeri. However, Tinashe changes the subject and takes the king's son to the balcony to ask him alone if he likes Nark, her dragon, because she's thinking of giving the creature to the prince. He likes the idea, so the witch transfers ownership of the winged beast to him. Excited about this, Tinashe floats into the man's arms, who kisses her, and to her surprise, the witch doesn't pull away because according to her, it's good to shake things up. Sometime later, King Kevin's party begins and Tinashe continues to complain about having to attend this event, while Oscar promises to keep her identity a secret. She understands but promises to blow the nobleman into pieces if she's introduced as his fiancée. When introducing himself to his father, Oscar congratulates His Majesty Kevin, the 20th King of Farsis, on his 53rd birthday today. Soon Cecilia, the Princess of Thayeri, appears at the party catching Oscar's attention, who laments the attack suffered by her nation. Cecilia emphasizes that they were just annoying mosquitoes and nothing more. Anyway, the Prince of Farsis would like to know more about Kuzco and the invaders, and the princess would love to tell a story, but perhaps in a more private place. Meanwhile, Kevin thanks Tinashe for her presence, especially for breaking the curse on his son. The witch feels happy to fulfill her pact and announces that Oscar is now free to marry whoever he wants. Speaking of which, the prince appears in the corridor being dragged by the Princess of Thayeri, who gives a cynical glance to Tinashe. The king laughs at the situation, saying he can't control his son and his age, but confesses that he would prefer him to marry Tinashe. Taking a breath of fresh air, the witch is relieved that she can't even dance with the dress she's wearing. Suddenly, she looks ahead and sees Lanak. At the same time, Cecilia shows off to Oscar by saying that her dress took 6 months to be sewn, but the man is fed up with this talk. At this moment, Tinashe enters the room and asks the princess to leave because she needs to discuss an urgent matter with Oscar. Cecilia is offended and questions who she thinks she is to speak to her like that. The prince explains that she is a trusted mage, while the princess orders her to leave as she is just a mere servant. In response, Tinashe tells the princess to shut up and even calls her an imbecile. Having said that, Cecilia cowers and turns around. Without the presence of the shrew, Tinashe puts a drop of her blood behind the prince's ear and reveals that she should have died 400 years ago, so he couldn't fall in love with the dead, but rather freed himself from it and contemplate the future of this nation that depends on its future king. As she spoke these words, the witch was backing away. When Oscar tries to reach her, the witch stops the man and remembers when she broke Lucrezia's spell. Then Lanak appears from a portal, praising the beauty of Eddie. Tinashe hugs the king tightly, happy to see him alive. Then Lanak reveals that he created an entire nation called Kuskal, just for Addie to become queen. A nation built from the ruins of others. Oscar can't believe what he sees, while Tinashe lets herself be embraced by the king of Kuskal. Lanak notices that the other man present wields the Akashi's sword and therefore needs to be destroyed. But Tinashe convinces him to leave Oscar aside because even though the sword is powerful, it's useless if the user is weak. Incredulous, the prince wants to know what's going on. So the witch rudely replies that their pact ends tonight because the curse has been broken. Oscar threatens to draw the sword, but Tinashe warns that any aggression against Lanak is an aggression against her. When the woman clashes her sword against Oscar's, he remembers the training with her in the tower and concludes that he is capable of killing the Blue Moon Witch, but still hesitates, giving Lanak the opportunity to take his beloved away through the portal he came from. The next day, the mages of Pharsis mourn the departure of their mistress, as well as the impact it had on Oscar's mind. Speaking of which, the nobleman appears handing paperwork to Lazar and telling him to take care of the rest. The servant asks where the prince is going, and he informs that he's going to Lucrezia's forest. Lazar tries to prevent his master's journey, but he doesn't back down from his conviction. However, Lucrezia appears in the castle to spare the young heir the trip. Soon the witch of the Forbidden Forest reveals that she also received an invitation to Kuskal, like Tinashe. Just like all the witches, she declined, but Tinashe's acceptance could cause problems across the entire continent. Aside from that, Oscar wants to know the nature of the relationship between Lanak and Tinashe, and Lucrezia explains that she has been searching for him ever since she became a witch. In a way, the witch of the forest is happy to see her friend find the one she's been searching for so long. However, Oscar thinks that man wasn't in his right mind, as if he were in a dreamlike haze. Whether it makes sense or not, Lucrezia thinks that Oscar is feeling the pain of betrayal, but regardless, he declares that he will not give up on his future wife, so he will kill that guy and bring her back. If she wants to date another man, then he'll throw in the towel and let the woman flee. Lucrezia understands the noble motivation of the love-struck man, and therefore she's willing to reveal what Tinashe personally said to her, but only to the ears of those who are prepared to fight her to the death. Faced with the declaration, the mages don't know how to react until the prince orders the witch to move on. Before anything else, Lucrezia reveals that the true name of the Blue Moon Witch is Tinashe as Meyer Eterna Tolder. Surprised, one mage comments that Tolder is the magical empire that was destroyed overnight 400 years ago, and Lucrezia adds that Tinashe was a candidate for the queen of the empire. In Tolder, the ruler was not decided by lineage but by pure power. Oscar questions what would become of the nation if some eccentric took the throne, and Lucrezia replies that this was the reason Tinashe was separated from her parents at birth. Their candidates are chosen for king and queen, and end up engaged to each other. The boy, Lanak, was the king's only son. However, his power didn't even come close to Tinashe's. Everyone thought the two would marry, and Lanak treated Tinashe very kindly, as if she were a sister 5 years younger. However, unbeknownst to them, the royal court was divided into two factions: the reformists, who supported diplomacy with foreign nations, and the traditionalists, who preached isolationism above all else. As this division grew, the king fell ill, so with the imminent death of the supreme leader, the reformists began to support Tinashe, while the traditionalists sided with Lanak. Since the woman had the right to the throne, the followers of the man devised a plan to turn the tables. This happened when Tinashe was 13 years old, and one night she opened her eyes and saw Lanak taking her to the cathedral, where some men dressed in black tunics gathered around an altar. Then Lanak affectionately places the girl on this altar and stabs her in the stomach several times with a sword. The servants around recite a spell while Lanak continues to stab the child. After that, a dark aura emerges from Tinashe's body, and Lanak promises to surpass her with this power. However, that massive energy goes out of control and consumes the servants of the sanctuary, then Lanak disappears from there, leaving Tinashe behind. The dark energy explodes and multiplies in size with the girl at its center, and soon all of that gigantic sphere is absorbed into her body. When the magical whirlwind ended, somehow the girl's torn stomach had been healed, even though she felt unbearable pain for 3 days without stopping. After this event, Tuldar had been condemned to ruins, and the magic that overflowed from that sanctuary absorbed the souls of those who died in the tragedy, spreading across the continent and turning into 5 magical lakes. Thus, this whole process was what turned Tinashe into a witch. After all this, she built a tower in the corner of what was Tuldar's territory to live in, and since then, she has been searching for Lanak. Upon hearing the whole story, Oscar asks what she felt about him. In response, Lucrezia recalls that the witch temporarily sealed his defensive barrier in Lanak's presence, which certainly saved his life. Furthermore, she gave the dragon to the prince herself, meaning 2 gestures that are worth more than 1,000 words. Be that as it may, this doesn't change Oscar's plans as he maintains his intention to kill Lanak and bring Tinashe back. Next, the king receives a letter from Cuscal, demanding the surrender of the other 4 great nations, Tayuri, Caesar, Gandona, and Pharsis. An advisor recounts that a few days ago, Tayuri marched with 10,000 men to Cuscal, but the army was decimated while only 50 enemy mages were defeated. With Tayuri weakened, 5 cities of the nation were taken along with the lives of 5,000 people. Mysteriously, the buildings of these cities remained intact, while all the people simply disappeared, and apparently, this is the work of the Blue Moon Witch. Thus, King Kevin announces that the nations demand the Bearer of Acacia to execute the witch. However, even though he is the only one capable of doing so, Oscar Pharsis refuses to comply with such a request, believing that Tinashe and Cuscal are not working together. That said, the king rises angrily and questions if his son has been enchanted by the witch, as he speaks this way when the fate of the nation falls on his shoulders. Still, Oscar stands by his decision, so Kevin strangely regains his composure and releases his son to do as he pleases as long as he assumes the throne as king. Understanding his father's motivations, Oscar accepts the challenge. Far away, Tinashe reflects that as long as she remains a witch, the Bearer of Acacia will be responsible for her death. Elsewhere, facing a red moon, Rost, Prince of Tayuri, agonizes over the prospect of a devastating defeat against the mages of Cuscal. Right now, the best course of action would be to gather all troops and assume personal command of the army. At that moment, the Blue Moon Witch appears unexpectedly, accompanied by 2 more mages. The prince draws his sword and hurls insults at her, prompting one of the companions, Tris, a mage from Cuscal, to question his behavior. However, Tinashe is pressed for time and asks Pamir to take Tris away. Then she informs Rus that everything will conclude in 2 weeks, thus he should postpone the march to Cuscal until then. Roost expresses offense at taking orders from a mere mage, and she uses the way she was addressed to explain the reason for Tayuri's downfall. The prince retorts that the power of mages disturbs the world of the one true deity, Iridirdia. With that said, Tinashe asks if the man has ever plunged a sword into the skull of a child or burned alive a mother clutching her crying child, because Tayuri is the place that tolerated such acts. According to her, as the successor to the throne, Roos should know, since he studies the nations of the world, that 300 years have passed since the Age of Darkness and no nation as fiercely self-centered as his has survived. Then, before leaving, the witch remarks that the prince seems to be corroding his own entrails. Rist attempts to summon the witch to continue the conversation, but gives up upon seeing the expression on her face. Meanwhile, at the castle of Cuscal, the nation of mages, Lanak learns that the 4 great nations are pooling their forces, but in his opinion, this changes little. Next, he demonstrates through his magic how the map of the continent will appear when covered to its 4 corners by the spell, which is possible with Adi by Cuscal's side. Speaking of her, Lanak recalls that the woman was a good and obedient student, but is interrupted mid-sentence, invaded by a feeling of being in a dream. Tinashe assures him that the man is not dreaming and he knows that, but his body sweats as if unaware. Following this event, Tinashe converses with one of the mages of Cuscal, Renart, and remarks that all the witches on the continent are women because men's bodies, magically speaking, are unstable and cannot withstand for long. In other words, Lanak is experiencing the psychological effects of this. However, it is still possible to conjure a spell of continental levels. As planned, after all, Tinashe has that capability, though such a significant magic will certainly change things drastically. Meanwhile, a man eavesdrops on the conversation between the two. Back in Tayuri, the Pharsis delegation does not understand why they have been in that country for 6 days, with no negotiations progressing, and they consider this to be due to the overwhelming defeat they suffered on the plains of Asdra, forcing Tayuri to pick up the pieces, even though now the 4 great nations have gathered their armies. At this moment, Lazar arrives and informs Oscar that something has happened in Pharsis. The prince emphasizes that several cities in the 4 nations are being attacked while they are stuck there. Finally, he wants to know if Tinashe has anything to do with it, although no one can say. Next, it is Cecilia's turn to enter the room, and Oscar is no longer pleased with the local princess's daily visits. This time, Cecilia tries to assert her presence, claiming to have seen the witch whom the prince loves to be with, the Blue Moon Witch. Oscar doesn't want to believe that this woman has any relevant information about it, and she plays hardball after baiting, but soon reveals that Tinashe visits her brother, Rust, every night. Impatiently, Oscar instructs the princess to guide him to Rust's room, making the woman regret not taking the hair of farces seriously. In no time, Oscar was already inside the quarters of the Prince of Thwart, questioning with acacia in hand whether it was this kingdom that asked him to execute the witch. Rust doesn't know how to react to the situation until Tinashe appears once again on the man's balcony, and Sue startles at Oscar's presence. The Prince of Farces extends his hand to his beloved, but the mages of Cusco grab her by the arms, while Renard opens a portal to take the three of them back to their kingdom. The next day, during the organization of the nation's armies, Oscar complains that Prince Rust's stance has cost the Alliance a lot of time, besides expressing curiosity about this event that Tinashe said has passed. Lucrezia appears and informs that she checked all the cities and that it really seemed that all the people had disappeared, but it was a defensive barrier so that no one would notice the populations who still remain there. At the same time, the witch warns that Tinashe will not protect herself, so Oscar must be her shield. Meanwhile, in the leadership of the troops, General Caesar discusses with General Gandona that this is a hard story to swallow until a man emerges in the middle of the army and introduces himself as Bartolo's chief mage of Cusco. The battalions draw their swords immediately, and the mage laments the aggression because he thought everyone would like to see their king extending his dominion throughout the continent, especially since Bartolo's himself is capable of guiding people along that path. The soldiers question who would be crazy enough to accept such a thing, but Oscar offers to go to Cusco, only for the mage to teleport all the present men to their nation. Upon arriving there, Oscar looks around and is faced with the very definition of an ambush. Dozens and dozens of sorcerers surrounding the trapped soldiers until Lanak appears and welcomes the visitors to the ruins of the Cathedral of Tulder. He then reveals that the reason for this meeting is for him to offer a proposal, emphasizing that the continent is filled with discrimination and cruel conflicts. Lanak's goal is to end this discord through unification, and if anyone disagrees with this measure, it will receive immediate divine punishment because soon he will receive the necessary power for it. Besides, he presents his fiancée, Atis. When exhibited in meeting Oscar among the visitors, Tinashe cannot help but react, so Lanak asks him what happened. The witch avoids the subject and questions the reason for the visits, so the king of Cusco recounts that he wanted everyone to witness the final moments until the conclusion of the procedure. With that said, Tinashe understands the reason and conjures a throne for herself to sit on. At that moment, Lanak approaches and casts a spell that extends to the skies, causing light objects to levitate from the ground. Oscar focuses on thinking of a way to interrupt this process, while Lanak commands the first lake, Compassion, to be born, the first of the 5 that will be formed by the energy and magic of nature, along with countless human souls. With the magical union of these 5 elements, the wizard will be able to watch over the entire continent from wherever he is, as well as control the weather itself as he wishes. He then inaugurates the second lake, Jealousy, and the third, Denial. Afterwards, he takes another step toward his plan by conjuring the 4th lake, Admiration, and lastly, the final lake, Hatred. With this, Lanak contemplates the dawn of a new era in front of allies and those who claim to be his enemies, until Tinashe interferes and replaces the magical circle of the king of Cusco with her own. She explains that she has been searching for Lanak all this time, and when she finally found him, she was so happy that she could have cried because she saw the wizard as someone truly necessary. For instance, when invoking the lakes, the man was the only one who knew their defined names. However, now it's time to free the souls of the citizens Lanak killed 400 years ago, who merged and were trapped by the magical lakes. Faced with this, Lanak questions whether Eddie will betray him again, and she laughs at the wizard's thought while beginning his punishment. The king orders his subordinates to eliminate the witch, so Renard and Pamira form a magical shield to protect Tinashe. The witch asks them to flee, but they know that protecting Tinashe in this case is like preventing the queen in chess from being taken off the board because only a piece like her is capable of sublimating the magical lakes, this spell so complex and gigantic. However, Bartolos, who remains loyal to the sovereign of Sescal, has nothing to do with it and knocks Pamira down with his magic, opening a hole in the shield that surrounds Tinashe. Taking advantage of this gap, the wizard unleashes another spell towards the witch, but this time it's Oscar who avoids the worst using the royal sword Acacia. With that done, Tinashe asks the prince to hold off the enemies for 10 minutes, and Bartolos mentions with a certain disdain the legends he's heard about the swordsman wielding Acacia, so he begins to attack the bearer of the weapon. At the same time, Triss doesn't know what to do in the face of Tinashe's betrayal to the king of Cusco, so he moves away from the conflict. Lanak orders the demons to be summoned, joining the wizards in battle against the 4 nations. Rust is violently harassed by a young wizard from Cusco, who accuses the prince of killing his sister. Although he didn't do it personally, Roos knows that this is the consequence of centuries of crimes carried by Tayuri. However, Meridina knocks the child out and saves the noble's skin. Meanwhile, Renard and Pamela notice that Tinashe is casting a double enchantment of Tolder's coronation ceremony, a spell capable of freeing the spirits of Tolder invoked by its first ruler. Sylvia thought this was just a legend, as it's not possible for someone to control all 12 high-level spirits at once. Witnessing this, Bartolomeo knows it's the end just when he has the chance to eliminate those who killed so many wizards. Nevertheless, he intends to go down fighting, so he strikes Oscar, his rival, with the powerful fire spell, but the knight is quick enough to surprise the wizard and end his life. Finally, Tinashe gathers the necessary power to free the spirits bound to Tolder by the ancient pact, and the 12 gather after this long time and are ordered by the witch to annihilate her enemies, sparing those who no longer intend to fight. Just as quickly as they appeared, the spirits eliminate the forces of Cuscal in the blink of an eye and then evaporate. Faced with his defeat, Lanak kneels before Oscar and places all the blame for Tolder's demise on the Blue Moon Witch. Oscar emphasizes that Tinashe believed in the king of Cuscal to the end, so he wants to know what he felt when he gutted his former companion. Lanak can't hold back and bursts into laughter because he felt nothing, seeing the girl as a mere tool. With that said, Oscar raises Acacia and delivers the final blow to the king of Cuscal. Afterwards, the magic used in the war begins to dissipate into the skies, forming a beautiful visual spectacle, along with the souls liberated by Tinashe. Despite the witch's support, General Gandona reminds the bearer Acacia that he has a duty, so Oscar approaches Tinashe. Renard and Pamela threaten to react, but the witch knows it's not hostility. Then Oscar asks Tinashe if she remembers what he said when she broke Lucrezia's spell. The woman nods yes, and Oscar threatens to draw his sword, but she faints in the process. A week later, she wakes up in front of the Prince of Pharsis and doesn't understand why she's still alive. First, Oscar tells her that Prince Roos decided not to use force against Cuscal, leaving the region as an autonomous state for wizards. Then, as if it were nothing, he reveals that Tinashe is now officially engaged to him. Obviously, she wants to know what this story is about, so he explains that it was the only way to bring her alive to Pharsis. After all, some wizards from Cuscal wanted to kill the witch and steal her powers. Either way, he asked the woman to fulfill her duty well in the remaining 6 months. Faced with this, Tinashe rebels at first but eventually yields to the circumstances. Hey folks, if you're digging this anime and want to see more, drop a like down below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We need your support to hit 90,000 subscribers. Every subscription counts and helps us grow our community. Catch you in the next one.